All right, so understanding menopause, brought to you by Natural Medicine Week, thanks to ATMS. If you missed out on yesterday's webinar, it's actually uploaded on my YouTube channel, so feel free to go and check it out. It'll be up definitely for the whole week, so you can look at it another night. You can focus on being here tonight, and tomorrow is going to be minerals for menopause. Okay, so I'm Jennifer Harrington. I am Clinical Director of Menopause Natural Solutions. I'm an author, podcaster, and perimenopausal woman. But tonight's not about my experience. It's about trying to help you with your experience. So I've put together a little poll. Let's see if I can get it to work. Okay, poll. Hopefully you guys can see the poll. What I'm after is trying to find out where you are in the menopausal transition. And what we're going to look at next is actually the female hormonal life cycle. And many women are a bit confused when it comes to perimenopause, menopause. So we'll go through that definition tonight. We still have a few people left to answer, so I'll give that another moment. I just want to see if I can try and gauge it towards what's going on for you guys. Okay, so we seem to have 50% perimenopause. We have 40% postmenopause, and we have 10% here to support someone else. So I think that is wonderful. You are all welcome, no matter where you are in the cycle. And if you're here to support somebody else, thank you. Okay, so when we look at the female hormonal life cycle, it actually really starts with birth. Most women are surprised when I tell them that you're actually born with hormones. You're just born with lower amounts and slightly different forms, but you still have hormones. When they really start to kick in is around puberty. We start seeing little fluctuations, little surges. So estrogen comes in first, and when we find that we are actually starting to develop follicles and ovulate, it's the act of ovulation that brings in your progesterone, which comes in slightly later. But eventually you get your act together and you do have more regular ovulations, and that moves into your fertile years. But when we're looking at puberty, puberty has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, I doubt there's anyone here that is still going through puberty. I'm sure that has all been and done. After puberty, we find that we have a more calm time, more settled time in our fertile years. And this is roughly a 25-year window. I'm very mindful that for some women, it's not a calm cycle, like due to endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and other reproductive conditions. It's still a bit of turmoil for them, but for the vast majority of us, we do have an easier time during that fertile window. After that fertile window ends, we hit, it's not really an actual end, because perimenopause, your time of transition, comes in unexpectedly. So some women notice, oh, my period's a little bit different. Maybe the quality of bleed, maybe the length of time of the cycle is a little bit different. For other women, maybe they notice, I'm not tolerating this stress as well as I used to, or I'm more anxious, or my sleep is disturbed. It's not an obvious start to the transition. Sometimes it's quite subtle, but age-wise, most women, it's around their 40s. For me, it was my late 30s, but late 30s, 40s is generally when that occurs. And what tends to happen is you're not ovulating every month anymore. And when you're not ovulating, you're not producing your progesterone. And then we start to get a ratio difference between how much estrogen and how much progesterone we have. And that ratio starts getting wider initially in early perimenopause. And some women, and I know I struggled here with relative estrogen dominance, where, like I said, that ratio was a little bit out. I had unopposed estrogen, and you can start to grow things like polyps, like cysts, like endometrial hyperplasia, where you start to have heavier bleeds and maybe clottier bleeds. Some women have flooding bleeds. But what I want to let you know with the perimenopausal transition, like puberty, it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. And that is one of the key takeaways for tonight, is that at times of transitions have ends, that this isn't the rest of your life. It is simply just a moment in the transition. And when we hit menopause, menopause is defined as 12 months after your last menstrual bleed. Um, for some women, this can get a little bit blurry. Say, for example, you've had a hysterectomy, but you still have your ovaries. You may still experience cyclic symptoms, maybe headaches or acne, cramps, but you're not getting that menstrual bleed. So it can get a bit tricky. And in those cases, we look at blood tests. And it's the same if you've got a Mirena. If you've got an IUD in, you might not be bleeding anymore. It might be really confusing as to when your last menstrual bleed was, but you may still be getting the full hormonal cycle. So again, we would look at blood tests in those two scenarios. If you don't have either of those, you really do look at your menstrual flow, because that's going to be more accurate than bloods, because bloods are going to change one day to the next. And even if they do look at bloods, they do one snapshot and then they repeat it 6 weeks later. So if you were cycling, you're in a different time of your cycle, and then they compare those two readings. Because if one is like a postmenopausal reading and one is a fertile reading, we know that there's still a cycle going on in there. But then comes postmenopause. When the transition is over, the calm settles and we have smooth sailing from here. But I also want to let you know that postmenopause is not no hormones. It is a lower level of hormones, and it's also a different form of hormones. It's very similar to puberty. When we think of prepubescent girls, we don't think that they're hormonal deficient. We just think that's the way they should be. That is the natural cycle. And it should be the same with postmenopause. This is the way we were designed. Menopause isn't new. It didn't start with our generation. It's been going for as long as mankind has existed. And if you're a reader, there's a really good book that I wanted to mention called The Slow Moon Climbs. And Susan, the author, is a historian, and she looks at the history of menopause. She looks at menopause in Indigenous cultures. It's a really, really interesting read, although the middle section does get a little meaty with the science. So if you get stuck in there, just move to the final section. I love the final section. Anyway, if you like reading, read it. Let me know what you think. So getting back to this, most of us are in perimenopause, me included. And for us, there is an end. For those who are in postmenopause, if you are still symptomatic, know that the further away you get from your menopausal date, the less symptoms you're likely to experience. And 2 years after the transition, if you're still experiencing symptoms, they're not likely to be part of the hormonal picture. They're likely to be something else. Anyway, moving on, I wanted to have a chat about symptoms. So when we look at this bell-shaped symptom curve, we can see that 20% of females transition through to menopause with a 0 symptom. They simply stop bleeding one day and that's it. How lucky are they? Like, I know some women that this has happened with. I know most women know somebody that this has happened to. Um, Possibly not us, that's why we're here. But I'm grateful I'm not in the other end, which is the 20% of extreme symptoms. These unfortunate women have like 11 out of 10 symptom intensity, and they tend to have more symptoms than most women. They really are not in a good space. And the rest of us are somewhere in the middle here. And getting back to what I was saying before about transitional symptoms being temporary, I do not recommend sticking your head in the sand and waiting it out, especially if you're on this side of the curve, because transitional symptoms can take decades to resolve. So let's have a quick look. If I can get poll number 2 up, we are going to have a look at your intensity of symptoms, and we're going to look at what symptoms that you are experiencing. Here we go. So with this, Zoom only allows me to put 10 symptoms in. But I know, and my friend Andrea Donsky, who's a researcher from Morphus, has put together over 110 symptoms of the transition. So your symptoms may not be in there, but these are just some of the ones that are the most common. And the second question in the survey was more to do with severity. So if you're the person that's supporting someone, you're not having any symptoms, but you might be having mild or moderate or intense symptoms. I'll just give you a few moments to fill this in. I have a drink. Okay, let's have a look at this. So 50% of you are experiencing fatigue. 40% of you are experiencing sleep problems. Actually, I'm going to write this down so I can come back to it. Fatigue. 50% sleep. We've got 40% weight, 50 brain fog, 50 temperature, 40. Isn't that interesting? A lot of people think, the menopausal transition, hot flushes, night sweats, cold sweats. But it's only 40% of you guys. 40% are in pain. And moods, we've got 50%. Okie dokie. And most of you are more on the moderate side. So moderate, 80% moderate and 20% mild. So let's have a look at some of these symptoms. Sorry, it's just come up. Oh, I've gone past it. Sorry, guys, I'm just struggling with getting rid of the poll so I can see. Here we go. All right. So what we know is that none of the symptoms were 100%. So no two symptomatic women are the same. We all come in with different combinations of different symptoms and different intensity of different symptoms. So here is just some of the common ones. But when we're looking at how common some of these are, if we look to the Evernow study. So the Evernow study is the largest study of menopausal women that we currently have. And this is looking at 100,000 women. And from these women, they found that 81.5% were experiencing fatigue. So in this study, it was the number one symptom. In our small little collection, We actually had it tied as number one with some other factors going on, but with a smaller sample size than they do. The number two symptom that they found was sleep disturbances. So we also found that sleep was quite high on our list. Weight changes in at number three, brain fog at number four. And isn't that interesting then? Hot flushes back at number five, in there with our night sweats. And then we had joint and muscle discomfort, anxiety, depression, and mood swings, vaginal dryness, skin and hair changes, painful sex, heart discomfort, acne, urinary issues, and unusual periods. So just because these symptoms are common, please do not think that they are normal. These are signs and symptoms that something is not quite right. And remember, it can take over a decade, so don't stick your head in the sand. So I have a leaky bucket analogy. If we are all so different, and if we are all having so many more symptoms than potentially previous generations, why is that? So I think of the body as a bucket, and we ding it sometimes, we punch our holes in it, and we leak our health and our vitality out. So I see my job as a naturopath as a bit of a detective, where I'm going along and I'm trying to identify some of these factors so that we can, rather than putting a band-aid on the top, we can heal it from the inside so that we can retain some of our energy and our vitality and our health so that we can live longer and healthier lives. So, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to go through some of the top reasons, or some of the most common reasons that I see in my clinic, as to why we get holes in our buckets and leak our energy. So, let's move on. So, number one is poor diet. I know that there are some familiar names here from last night. So last night I spoke about functional foods for the menopausal transition. We did look at dietary basics, and we also looked at phytoestrogens. So if you missed last night, go to the YouTube channel and you can have a look. And just to summarize it for now, we're really looking at, are you drinking adequate water? Are you hydrated? Are you consuming adequate protein? Are you consuming the right fats? And that was a key discussion last night, was we now know that fats aren't dangerous. Like, we shouldn't be avoiding them and having low fat diets, but which ones are good? So you might want to go back and look at that. And also, how much sugar and processed carbohydrates are we consuming? Now, this can certainly play a big role in making or breaking the transition, especially when we're looking at some of these symptoms like weight gain. Actually, sugar is one of the top triggers for hot flushes. So it's also something to consider with your symptoms. If you notice they're coming on after meals, what did I just eat? Sometimes you might also find that you have a really bad night's sleep, worse than normal, and you're like, what did I do? Ah, I had a glass of wine for dinner. So your body gives you clues if you start listening to it. I do recommend that you consider getting just a blank notebook that you use as a diary, where you can jot down experiences. I've had a great day today. What was different about today? No, I went for a coastal walk, or I spent some time at the park, or just to give yourself those sort of hints and clues. So when you are having bad times, you can go back and reflect and go, okay, well, I did have a glass of wine and a dessert. That's why I'm not sleeping and I'm having some night sweats. Um, so foods can be a huge trigger. Number two is a toxic environment. We all live in different homes. You might have water damage in your home. I might still have lead-based paint in my walls. Where that is a very big point of difference between us as individual women. And also we need to look at things like your chemical exposure. So things like xenoestrogens are environmental estrogens that mimic estrogen, similar to phytoestrogens, but they have a stronger, more proliferative effect. So you're more likely to have issues with xenoestrogens. And these come in things like plastics, in perfumes, and a lot of your household cleaning and your self-care products. So I don't recommend binning everything. I recommend using what you've got at home, and when it's time to replace it, then going and looking for a healthier product. And what is really cool is that these are so much easier to find in the supermarket than ever before. So if you shop at Woolies, EcoStore is a really good brand that has been around for decades. And in Coles, they have something similar. So it's about slowly, bit by bit, replacing it so that we're having a healthier home. And obesogens are also found in, like I said, things like plastics and perfumes, fire retardants, and other chemicals. We want to get them out, especially if you're one of the 50% that mention weight. So the third thing is lifestyle habits. How active are you? Like, we are designed to be hunter-gatherers. We're designed to get out there and move every day. Like, I know I have some days where I'm guilty of just being on telehealth consultations all day and just sitting here and looking at the screen. But I try and make sure I give myself a break to get up, to walk, to move, or maybe go for a walk beforehand. I'm lucky I've got a dog, so I need to walk her. So that gets me out of the house and moving. But with activity, we really want three different forms of activity. We want cardiovascular activity, so things like walking and swimming and cycling and dancing. We want a weights-based component. It is thought that muscle is the organ of longevity. Have a look at your muscles. It might be time that we start building them up, because after menopause, in that postmenopausal period, we are more prone to sarcopenia, which is the muscle equivalent of osteoporosis. It's just the reduction in the muscle mass. We really want to prevent that at all costs. So you don't need to go and join the gym. You can use body weights, you can use hand weights or kettlebells or do things at home, but you really do want to think about the health of your muscles, because muscles not only work on your tone, they also have a key role in blood sugar regulation and preventing frailty. Nobody wants to become that frail old woman that falls down or that shuffles really slowly. So now, well, yesterday actually, but we can't go back to yesterday. So today is the best day to start thinking about what we can do with our muscle health. And the third activity is stretching and flexibility. We want to make sure that we've got flexibility and balance. Maybe you can't touch your toes anymore. Maybe you don't need to touch your toes anymore, but it's good to be able to move your body. Moving on to smoking. We know that smokers have earlier and more intense menopausal transitions. I know quitting smoking is not easy, but having intense menopausal symptoms isn't either. So maybe it's time to consider not smoking. Same with excessive alcohol consumption. Some women really do notice alcohol is a key trigger for symptoms, and the big ones are sleep and heat. Some women find it's the type of alcohol, that maybe they can't drink red wine, but they can drink a white spirit. Or maybe it's the quantity, or maybe you can't have any at all. And that could be temporary while you transition, or maybe this is a time to say goodbye. And then we look at stress management. So I'm not going to talk too much about stress management now, because adrenal health is another factor. And when we talk about adrenal health, I will talk about stress management. So number 4 is nutritional deficiencies. So again, I see the body as a house, and I see your vitamins and minerals and essential fatty acids as being key building blocks that build your house. We want to have a good structure. And unfortunately, deficiencies are really, really common. The literature is indicating that 1 in 3 people have at least 10 mineral deficiencies. So this is what tomorrow's meeting is all about. So hopefully you've registered and you can join me for that. Otherwise, you'll have to wait, watch the replay. But I really can't tell you how important it is to have adequate vitamins and minerals. Adrenal health. I told you I'd get to adrenal health. So, your adrenal glands are thought of as your stress glands. They produce your stress hormones. And a lot of women experience a reduction in their ability to tolerate stress as they move through the menopausal transition. So, these adrenal glands are really under the pump, just trying to keep up with the production of your stress hormones. And then we expect them to start producing our stress hormones as well. So if you've got an overworked adrenal gland, not going to go very well. But unfortunately, we all live in the same world. So I've got the same stresses as everybody else. And for me, it's a factor. Like, stress is real. And I'm sure it is for you guys as well. So we need to start thinking about stress management, because we can't necessarily change what's going on in the outside world, but we can consider and change how we respond to that situation. So let's jump onto chat for a second. I want to find out what stress management tools you guys already know about and which ones you're currently using. Anybody doing anything for stress management? Mindfulness. Fantastic. And for you, for mindfulness, is it more breathing exercises? Is it meditation? I think it's fabulous. This year, I bought myself a present. I bought myself Mind Valley app. So I like going through some of those meditations and some of those stress management programs. You've got box breathing, 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 breathing. Love it. Meditation, saunas, facials. Sounds like you guys are good with the stress management. Yoga. Qigong is something that I've started in the last year or so too. Really love Qigong. But it's really about taking me time. It's like not looking after everyone else for a moment. And it's things you can do in the house. Like, it may be, okay, I'm going to have a long soak in the bath, or I'm going to read a good book, or I'm going to take a walk or play with your pets. Good. I'm glad that you've got some ideas. Exercise, by the way, is one of the best stress management tools. I know I mentioned yoga and things, but any sort of exercise, particularly exercise when you're outside, you're out in nature, because there's other benefits from that. So getting back to your stress hormones. So your stress hormones are responsible for producing estrone, which is the main form of estrogen that we have in postmenopause. Okay, moving on to number 6 is digestive health and your microbiome. I'm not sure whether you're aware, but in your microbiome, there's a subset called the estrobolome. And it really is the section of the microbiome that is responsible for metabolizing estrogen. So what happens is, when estrogen's circulating through the body, when we have too much of it, it gets put a tag on it for excretion. But if you have dysbiosis in your gut and your dysbiotic bacteria is producing a lot of beta-glucuronorase is an enzyme, and it likes to chop the tag off the top, because the tag that's put on the top is the favorite food of a lot of the dysbiotic bacteria. So they want to produce beta-glucuronorase so they can take the tag off and they can consume their favorite food. And this estrogen doesn't get metabolized or excreted. It gets recycled and used again. And that's another reason why some women in perimenopause really struggle, is because they're recycling their estrogen, and they may be having estrogen dominance anyway because they're not having an ovulation every month. So I do really like to look at the health of the gut. If you have digestive issues, it really would be one of the primary places that I would start working on. And then we also need to look at your hormones. So serotonin, one of our feel-good neurotransmitters, is actually produced in the digestive system. And it is thought that 95% of it is produced there. So all those people that were talking about moods, that was 50% of you. How's your digestive system functioning? Some signs could be altered bowel movements, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, flatulence, heartburn, nausea. If you're having any of those symptoms, you might need to work on your gut. But I want to talk to you about the thermoneutral zone. So the thermoneutral zone is the range of temperatures that you feel comfortable. So anything above this range and you're feeling hot and sweaty, anything below this range and you're feeling cold and shivery. And in between this, you're feeling really comfortable. So I like to think of it as the jacket on, jacket off syndrome of menopause. So different things change the range of temperatures that we can tolerate. So when we're looking at serotonin, serotonin helps to increase the range of temperatures we can tolerate without feeling hot. Cortisol, a stress hormone, and noradrenaline, another stress hormone, shrink the thermoneutral zone. Estrogen helps to increase it. So there's a couple of things that we need to look at here, but what we can change? We can change the amount of serotonin and the amount of cortisol we have. We can look at stress management techniques to give us a better range. And we can also work on our guts. We're producing more serotonin to give us a better range, so we're less likely to have symptoms. And number 7 is your general health. Any undiagnosed or poorly controlled disease processes are reducing your ability to transition with ease. And at this time of life, there's certain conditions that are more common or more likely to flare up or become problematic. And blood sugar regulation and diabetes are certainly more common during the transition. Suboptimal thyroid health can also increase in frequency at this time of life. Fatty liver disease and any sort of inflammatory conditions. So when I'm looking at this, we're going to have a quick run through and then I'm going to move on. So have you optimized your diet? Have you optimized your environment? Have you optimized your lifestyle habits? Do you have any nutritional deficiencies that you need to sort out? How are your adrenals functioning? How's your digestive system? And how's your general health? So when we're looking at this, what do you think is punching holes in your bucket? Like from what we've gone over so far tonight, does anyone have any ideas about where they think they need to focus for their particular symptoms? Have I given you any hints or clues that you think, I think I need to work on stress, or I need to work on digestion, or maybe I've got those 10 nutrient deficiencies? Nobody's got any ideas? That's okay, we'll keep going. So I'll tell you what I do. So I go and look, I start with general testing. I have a look at your nutritional status. So I'm looking to see if there are any of these nutritional deficiencies, because they're really easy things to top up. I have a look at what's happening with your blood sugar levels, your HbA1c, which is your 3-month average. I have a look at your insulin levels. We'll look at liver function, thyroid function, inflammatory markers, and a full blood count. And these are general testing you can get done with your doctor. Depending on the individual woman, there is no specific testing that I recommend for everyone. It all depends on her symptom picture. So what I may have a look at, depending on what's going on, is her hormone metabolites. So this might be an interesting concept for you. But things like estrogen, when it's metabolized, can go down the 2-hydroxy, the 4-hydroxy, or the 16-hydroxy pathway. And in that, we find that the 2 is the most beneficial and the most protective. We find that 4 can lead to carcinogenic growths. So we certainly don't want to be overutilizing that pathway. Where the 16 is not good either, but it's not as bad as the 4, but we can still find that there's a lot of circulation and elevation of estrogen and maybe non-cancerous growths, things like fibroids. So maybe for the perimenopausal woman, depending on her symptoms, I might start with looking at hormone metabolites. Okay, so I've just got a question. Given that hormones are going on a roller coaster, how many bloods should we get for an accurate reading? So, if you're a menstruating woman, I wouldn't recommend using blood testing as a way to determine whether you're in menopause. But like I said, if you've had a hysterectomy, but you still have ovaries, or if you've got a Mirena inserted, then you can look at getting a blood test and then repeating that in 6 weeks' time. That is what's recommended by the Australian GPs, is that 6-week retest. And depending on what that says, if that both of those are postmenopausal readings, then it's a good gauge that you could be postmenopausal. But I would also look at symptoms. Is there anything cyclic going on? Like if you're getting cyclic breast tenderness, then there's still something happening. So Sal, I hope that helps you out. So getting back to some of these other tests. So I mentioned beta-glucuronidase, which is that enzyme that dysbiotic bacteria produce so that they can gobble up the tag on the top of the estrogen. And we can look at this through stool testing. So stool testing not only does beta-glucuronidase, it also looks at your digestive health, how much acids and enzymes that you have, as well as looking at your microbiome. Have you got the good guys or the bad guys? What we need to try and reduce or increase. That is probably one of my most recommended testing, just because I like to start in the gut. There's so much going on there, and so many women have digestive-based symptoms. And we know that that is linked in with hormonal health. Sometimes I look at heavy metal toxicity, depending on what's going on. So we can do a hair test. HTMA test is a hair tissue mineral analysis, just looking at what you've been exposed to. So it's not necessarily what you've been exposed to, it's what your body has stored. So I know when I was a little girl, we used to have lead-based paint on blocks that I used to chew on. So I would still sometimes have lead come up on my testing, although I've had no current exposure to it. So it could have been the blocks, it could have been the lead in the paint, it could have been from the lead in the petrol. It's not necessarily what we've been exposed to. So if I was exposed to something in the last 24, 48 hours, blood is going to be the most accurate. But the body is really smart. It knows if you keep your toxic metals in your blood, it's going to get to an organ and cause damage. So what it likes to do is pull it from the blood and store it. And depending on the mineral, it has different preferences, but it's normally bone, muscle, or fat tissue. So lead is one that likes the bone. So then as we start going through the menopausal transition and we start having a reduction in bone mass, or that breakover or the turnover of bones, we can get that re-release of toxins that were once stored there. And when we're looking at fat, if you're trying to lose weight, as you're starting to break down fat stores, you can find that you're releasing old toxins. For some women, it can be a plateau. If they're doing really, really well and they plateau and they just can't break through, it could be because there's too many toxins in the body and the body is preventing further breakdown of fat because it's trying to process all these toxins. So just food for thought. So chemical contamination, we spoke a little bit about cleaning up your environment. So mold, Zea is the short name for that particular mycotoxin, which is a xenoestrogen and can definitely cause hormonal havoc. Unfortunately, we live in a humid environment here in Australia, so most of us at some point or another have experienced water damage. It's about removing yourself from that environment to see if you can clean it up, or whether it's, yeah, you can't move back. Cholesterol particle testing. This actually is really interesting. As women go through the transition, we find that their LDL levels start to rise. In standard GP testing, they check HDL, LDL, and HDL, but there's actually 11 forms of LDL. So what form is high? Like, we don't know from standard testing, but we can do particle testing, which actually breaks down these 11 different types of LDL, because 2 of them are actually preventative. They're going to protect us from heart disease, and we certainly don't want to be reducing those. One of them is neutral, and the rest of them are pretty nasty, so we do want to get rid of them. But I just like to think, well, what type is it? What are we actually trying to achieve? So sometimes I look at that. Bone density testing, I think that's a really good thing for most women to do. I'm pretty sure in Australia you need to be over 60 to get it on Medicare, but it's only like $100. So it might be something good to know. So you've got a baseline reading before you lose too much bone mass. I think it's crazy that we test later on in life when we've lost our bones to go, oops, it's a problem now. Where if we tested earlier, we could have started treating it so that it maybe stays at osteopenia and never gets to osteoporosis, because prevention really is so much easier than trying to fix a problem. And sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is really, really common in the menopausal transition and after. This is one of the things that doesn't tend to get better, unfortunately. And one of the key signs of sleep apnea is night sweats, actually waking up, and also sleeping issues and fatigue, morning headaches, things like that. So just want to check in, see if I have any questions. No, we're all good. Okay. Well, so I'm Jennifer Harrington. I am podcast host of Menopause Natural Solutions. So if you've enjoyed tonight, we've got almost 200 episodes on the podcast. So you may like to go and check that out. I am also author of the book From Invisible to Invincible, which you can't see. And I have a Natural Medicine Week special on that one, where it's only $20. It includes postage and handling, but it's only to Australian addresses. I also run webinars like tonight, and I run group programs. So I have my Menopause Makeover program, which I've decided to put together a special group for Natural Medicine Week, which starts in June. We're going to be running for the entire month of June, but every Wednesday night, we're going to touch base. And tonight, it's kind of similar to tonight, but instead you're going to have your cameras on, you're going to have your mics on, and it's going to be a discussion rather than me just presenting information to you. So that is limited to only 12 women, because I like the intimate group. And also, if it gets too big, we don't have time to hear from everyone. I want to make sure everybody has some time to interact. But my heart really sings with one-on-ones. So it's my bread and butter. What I do most days is those one-on-one consultations. And I do offer a complimentary discovery call if you want to have a chat to me to see if I am the right person to be working with you. But something that happened yesterday that excites me a lot is actually Namkan. So I started off my career at Chivasom in Thailand, working over there in the health retreat. And I stayed there for 2 years, and it was and still is the #1 health retreat in the world. But it also has that price tag attached to it that you would expect to find from the world's #1 health retreat. So I have been looking and considering something that is also luxurious, without the price tag attached. And these guys actually approached me. They approached me yesterday saying they want to run a menopause retreat and they would like me to host it. So I'm just got an expression of interest on my website. So we haven't organized dates, we haven't organized length of retreat or price or anything like that. So I'm just looking for an expression of interest so I know if it's worth pursuing or not. So keep in mind if you'd like to come on a holiday with me, it is on an eco farm. So there's organic farms and organic foods that we'll be eating every day. We'll have cooking classes. We have daily yoga, daily massages. How good is that for stress management? And being on the riverfront, we'll have all those river activities. We can go on cruises, we can go kayaking, we can go swimming. That really excites me. So hopefully it excites you too and you're interested. And even with the expression of interest, it's not a commitment. It's more just letting us know kind of what length of time you'd like to do. Because I don't think it's worth going to Laos for 3 days. I kind of think if you're going that far, you want to do maybe 5 or 7 or 9 days. I think if I had 2 weeks of daily massages, I don't know if I'd ever come home. So it's finding out what kind of length works for you guys and what you would enjoy. So I can see I have a question here. With beta-glucuronidase testing from stool analysis, is lower the better? There is a range, and yes, lower is better. Yeah, when beta-glucuronidase gets too high, it means we've got a lot of the bad bacteria that are cutting off the tags, and we're having more recycling of estrogen, which is not what we want. So, guys, I was expecting a lot more questions from you tonight. I don't know whether I've just answered everything as we've gone along, but I'm happy to sit here for a few moments if you want to ask me anything. Otherwise, I really want to thank you for your company tonight. I'm sure there's many things you could be doing on a Wednesday evening, but you chose to spend it with me, and I thank you for that.